Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sport Calgary's Return to Sport panel. I'm Katrina LeMaydon, President and CEO of Sport Calgary. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. Thank you to the panelists. With yesterday's announcement, the panel was going to be in person, physically distanced at Canada Sports Hall of Fame. So I do want to say a quick thank you to Cheryl Bernard and the team at the Hall of Fame. We'd hoped to be there, but obviously with the new restrictions, we felt that it was better to be via Zoom. So a quick thank you to them. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have, I think, a very interesting conversation. Again, if attendees want to ask questions, you can do it in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be monitoring that after we go through various questions with the panel. So thank you to this panel, great panel. And I want to give a quick introduction just in case people want a little more background on who our panel is. So first of all, we have Jeff Booke. He's the CEO of Repsol Sports Centre. His 20-year track record of leadership and management excellence was recognized in 2009 with his selection to Calgary's top 40 under 40, and again in 2014 with a Leaders of Tomorrow distinction. He's been active his entire life, and through his lifelong involvement in sport, Jeff was encouraged to pursue degrees in physical activity and sports studies from the University of Winnipeg and recreation studies from the University of Manitoba, and a Haskayne MBA. So Jeff, thank you for joining us. Cheryl Humphrey joined Swim Alberta in 2012 as executive director following a 20-year career in both municipal government and nonprofit sectors. Cheryl is an invested and passionate leader with experience leading organizations through systematic change. Cheryl, probably nothing like you're dealing with the change right now. Cheryl had the opportunity to serve on the task force and advisory committee for the development of the Alberta Sport Plan Implementation Plan with the Alberta Sport Connection. Her passion has been to work with organizations and their people to strengthen their ability to deliver on their mandates through effective governance policies and systems. In 2017, Cheryl became a certified executive coach through Royal Roads University and is trained in the PROSCI method of change management. So Cheryl, thank you for joining us. And finally, last but not least, we have Nick Ledgerwood, who is currently captaining the Cavalry FC and working on achieving his coaching A license. Nick played for Calgary Storm in 2002 before signing with 1860 Munich, German Bundesliga, in 2003. He later went on to make his professional debut in 2006 after excelling with the youth and reserve team. Nick would go on to have a successful career in Germany, playing in the second and third Bundesliga, making over 200 appearances. With a short stint in Sweden, he also played for historic club Hammarby. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Scoring one of the most memorable goals in their new stadium. 2016 saw Nick return to Canada. Thank you, Nick, for returning and playing 2 seasons with FC Edmonton of the NASL before moving back to Calgary and making his career full circle. So thank you to this panel. We're going to start this conversation sort of in a chronological way. If we look back to the beginning of the lockdown, feels like 10 years ago. It's really only, I guess, 8 months ago. Jeff, I'm going to start with you. When the initial lockdown happened, and again, I want to reference to everybody who's on this panel and attending and listening. You know, we're dealing with change every day, but I think it's very fitting that we're having this conversation today after the changes yesterday, because we will return to sport. So I think that's very fitting to have the conversation about how we dealt and how we're going to deal moving forward. So Jeff, if we look back to March, managing a facility, I mean, you have so many different user groups. So you have the general public, you have volunteers, you have staff, you have sport groups. How did you manage that first lockdown? What were your priorities?
Thanks, Katrina. It was certainly a challenge. I almost view it as though we had to engage in triage. That was our first approach, which was just to quickly take care of the people that matter. And for us, that is all our stakeholders and our staff. So it was about that. It was about taking the hand that you were dealt and quickly responding to all of those people that matter so much to us. So how are we going to look after our members, our program participants, our sport groups and sport partners, our employees. And in a way, I use the word triage, but we really did. We dealt with it in the moment, and only after we could come up a little bit and understand what we were dealing with, it was only then that I think we had the opportunity to make some more forward-thinking plans and move to a position of, as bad as the situation is, how do we leverage it to our advantage to ensure that when the order is lifted, we can come out of this in a state that positions us to be ready to return people to sport and to the facility and to support those groups that matter so much to us.
So quick question on that. I mean, was it today this is the announcement, and I mean, it honestly feels like so long ago, to the next day the doors were closed and staff were not allowed in, or like, because it's so many people, how did you even communicate that?
It really was that. So I believe we heard about the order on the evening of March 15th, and we were closed the next morning. Now, keep in mind, we open at 5 a.m. So we had to turn around in less than 12 hours, a facility that can see as many as 5,000 people a day, to shutting down everything. So we leveraged the talent of our team, credit to them and credit to the network. I often say, and I couldn't be more sincere about this, that we work in an environment that should be very competitive, but when push comes to shove, it's a very cooperative network of people. And so we relied on our staff, we relied on our external stakeholders like Sport Calgary and Swim Alberta, and we disseminated the information, and we just made sure that we had open lines of communication. We really worked hard, and that was a priority of ours, to make sure that we were communicating effectively, that we weren't closing down lines of communication. We were exposing ourselves and being open to respond to questions, comments, challenges, good and bad.
Okay. Cheryl, from a provincial sport organization, from a PSO, first question, how many clubs do you actually have under your umbrella?
Okay, so we actually have over 11,000 registered swimmer members across the province of Alberta. We have 55 summer clubs who operate from May through to mid-August, and then another 50 year-round clubs, as well as 3 varsity programs that fall under us, and probably about 20 master clubs, so adults plus programs. So what's interesting is we actually, if there's a pool in a community across Alberta, we are likely in it between our summer and year-round clubs. So we touch really all corners of the province.
So it wasn't a simple question about how many clubs, because my question to you was, I mean, Jeff's talking about closing doors, right? Turning people away. So now from a PSO perspective, when the shutdown happened, how do you as a provincial sport organization deal with I didn't write them down soon enough, how many clubs, but the different communities. How do you deal with that situation? How did you?
Yeah, and it was interesting because actually leading into the shutdown, the weekend, that Sunday when everything was shut down across the province, we were scheduled to have a provincial championship. So we were actually leading into that, working really closely with Repsol Centre where it was supposed to be held. What's interesting then is the term mass gathering. Nobody had heard of, but on the Government of Canada website was, you know, a risk assessment tool around mass gathering. And I remember several meetings with my staff and Jeff and his staff, mitigating risks and preparing for this provincial event that was slated to happen that weekend. And I can tell you, I woke up on March 12th and we were set to go. Like, we thought that weekend we would have a provincial championships. We had people driving down from Grand Prairie, Lloydminster across the province to come. By 9:30 that morning, and this is how quickly things moved at that point, we knew that we would need to likely cancel it, called an emergency board meeting. And probably 2 hours prior to the city of Calgary, who was the first city to instate sort of a state of emergency and shut down the city, we canceled our provincial championship. So we then had to communicate that message out first to people, some who were driving at the time down to the event. And I think similar to Jeff, it was just trying to keep those lines of communication open, because at first we were challenged why. And then I think as things slowly or quickly evolved, I guess, over those next few days, it became very apparent that we really had no choice, especially when the province locked down on that Sunday evening. So I would say very similar. We took an approach of trying to communicate out as best we could to our clubs directly, and have them filter the membership down to their various members and coaches that exist. And keeping those lines of communication open as best we could. And I think the other key thing that happened during that period of time, and what's so very different than now, is we all have 8 months of experience living in a world of a pandemic. We didn't have that experience back then. So everything felt so new and different. And there was lots of kind of people rushing to make quick decisions, and just because of lack of understanding. And one of the key messages that we sent out across the province to our clubs was just pause. We all just need to pause. We need to understand what's before us. We need to understand the government programs that are coming down the pipe before we all make quick decisions around closing clubs, laying off staff, because within those club programs, we have over 600 registered professional coaches as well too, who are paid. So part of that economic piece as well too. So yeah, to us, it was just creating that sense of pause and calmness so that we could begin to move forward with the clubs across the province.
For sure, it's a different situation now. I feel like we do know a lot more, even though there is an unknown every single morning. You talk about words that we didn't talk about before: mass gathering. I don't think I've ever used the word cohort before March. You know, now it's in our vocabulary at least once an hour. Nick, I'm going to turn to you. So, in a situation where you know, we're talking about sports being shut down and athletes sort of kind of going, oh, what's going to happen? So you were in that situation, and you were responsible for your training. And so how did you deal as an athlete? But then you're also captain. So that sense of responsibility then for the rest of the team, how did you deal? Like, how did you hear, first of all, and then how did you deal as an individual player and then as a captain as well?
Yeah, our preseason training started March 1st. So we have an extremely long off season in comparison to any other soccer league in the world. Our off season actually runs November till probably mid-February. Players start getting into individual training. March 1st is when we joined as a team. So all the players flew in from wherever they were to get settled, and we started March 1st. And we started hearing whispers of everything kind of traveling from Asia through Europe, and, you know, obviously young athletes being very optimistic. Oh, it's not going to come this far. Oh, we'll be fine here. It won't happen to us, you know. And the closer it got to March 15th was that realization that, you know, oh crap, this could be us shut down. Like, what, you know, how are we going to go about this? Is it going to be a 2-week? You know, and I think a lot of people just assumed, oh, it'll be a 2-week, 3-week, maybe a month max thing. So when we heard March 15th shut down, everybody went back to their homes, and it was kind of, okay, you guys stay home for however long this lockdown is going to be, and we need to get individual plans out to the players. For us, preseason is extremely important because that's your base for the whole season. That's you know, that's where you're going to do all your tactical training, get your fitness levels up to their peak, so that throughout the season you don't need to worry so much about that kind of stuff. So a preseason's extremely valuable for the team, especially new players coming in. They need to buy into the systems, and the fact that on March 15th, I think it was 10 days away from us leaving to a training camp down in Mexico. So we were supposed to get on a flight in 10 days, go to Mexico and have a 2-week training camp. Luckily, that didn't happen, or else we could have been stuck down in Mexico for God knows how long. But to the next point of being a captain and being responsible kind of for, I guess, the positivity in the team and optimism in the team, and how are we going to move forward. You know, we started our WhatsApp group right away. So all the members in the team were in a WhatsApp group, you know, bouncing questions off each other. How's it going to happen? What are we going to do? And the biggest thing was we held each other accountable for our individual fitness programs. So what we had is running programs, stuff with the ball, stuff we could all go out and do individually, but we held each other accountable for it. So everybody would check into this WhatsApp group saying, okay, here's my data from today. I ran 5 kilometers, 19 minutes. Everybody else would put it in their data, and you would still have this team camaraderie, the team spirit within a WhatsApp group. And that's how we kind of navigated through the first couple of weeks. And then, of course, the Zoom calls started coming. And that's how we started our training programs for that first, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks, 2-3 times a week. Boom, everybody's on a Zoom call, and we're going through workouts together just to stay in touch with each other and to get fit.
I think for a lot of the sport people that are on, whether they run teams, coach with associations that are on this call, I think the WhatsApp thing is interesting because a lot of people are zoomed out, and I get that. And it's the accountability side. And so I think especially now, we're end of November, a lot of sports are already within, maybe they've played games, they've made teams. So I think that's a great suggestion, is that accountability side, because it's very easy to say, oh, we're in lockdown, regardless of what age, but it's that accountability. And so I think that's great. Now, fast forward over the next few months, you said some of your teammates then went home. So over the next few months, again, every day, everybody's, when are things going to change? What's going to happen next? And then we started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And, as much as people are, we're all struggling, but there is light at the end of this next tunnel as well. We will come out of this. But how did you guys deal then? So were the players coming back? Because at this point still, I'm sure you'd heard rumblings about potential bubble or not. We'll talk about that later on. But how did you then deal as an organization, as a team, also as an individual, dealing over the next few months? Because it's easy enough to say we'll be accountable, but where are my teammates? Are they going to be able to get here?
Yeah, and that was a big thing too. I think we left it up to, or the coaching staff left it up to most of the players that were foreign and said, look, we're not going to stop you from going home to see your parents, to see your family, but we can't promise with any lockdowns that then you'll be able to return. And what that meant for our league and our organization was, if the players couldn't get back into the country, it might mean that their contract's then void. So that was a huge choice for some of the players to take that risk of, do I fly to Brazil? Do I fly to Honduras, to Germany? Not knowing if I can then get back to Canada if a league or a bubble tournament or anything then comes up. So one of our players who actually flew to Brazil to be with his family got very lucky because he couldn't fly through US to come back to Canada on the return. He actually had to fly through Frankfurt, Germany.
Oh, wow.
That return flight was Brazil, Frankfurt, and then back across is how he got back. So he was pretty fortunate to get back. There was 2 players that weren't allowed, one from Honduras and one that was actually also in Brazil but had visa problems, and they couldn't join us for the season. So that was the tricky part of being, you feel so bad for these guys because they're doing the workouts, they're being part of the group, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, sorry, bud, like, there's no way you can get into the country. What are we going to do?
And I think that's what, I think that's probably what's frustrating a lot of people, or not that specific situation, but the stuff that's out of our control. And so, I think with everything we just say, health and safety is the number one priority, and then there's stuff out of control. But Cheryl, I'm now going to turn to you on that question. So as we started, and we've been in various conversations, how much did you look to your NSO, so the National Sport Organization, but also then you're dealing with communities and facilities. So facilities might have their own sort of guidelines, and then your NSO might have different guidelines, and communities, you're all over Alberta, as you mentioned. So then communities have different guidelines. How did you even begin to develop a return to plan?
That feels like a long time ago as well too, Katrina. And what's interesting is it's not like we're given notice ahead, like what the guidance documents that are going to come out from the provincial government. But I would say initially we leaned heavy on our NSO because they were able to pull together, medical expertise, IST staff. We had 2 individuals from some Alberta staff members that sat on that national committee around the Return to plan. And then concurrently, as they were working on that, we were building what we felt would work likely in Alberta based on that. But really at that point, I would say super aligned to what would happen at the national level, and sort of a slow approach to a focus first on our high performance athletes so that we could demonstrate that, we were successful at the Return to, and then gradually adding in. I think what changed really quickly on us is that it became really apparent, and it is still, that provinces are all handling the pandemic differently. And so with the authority resting within provincial governments and each our own provincial health authority, things changed very quickly across the country. And so quickly in mid-June, we all of a sudden were open for sport, and we could automatically have these cohorts of 50 that could begin to participate. And so we had to really, at that point, change quickly to be able to accommodate that and build in the guidance and the requirements to still align. But what was interesting is other parts of the country still weren't there. So that very first document that Swimming Canada pulled together from, our NSO around a Return to was needed in other provinces, yet we were operating in a very different sphere around what could happen. And I would say the other key thing that we did is we began to launch our Return to, and clubs resumed back into the training, is we did work really hard with our facility partners. And so as we were communicating out to clubs what they could do in our guidance and requirements from a Swim Alberta perspective, we also were sharing that same message with our facilities so they would know what to expect from our swim clubs as they were approaching. And I would say the other key thing we said with clubs is, these are our provincial guidelines, but your individual facilities that you train out of may have additional requirements that you need to follow. So you need to work closely with them on your Return to plan. So we certainly had a provincial document, or our Return to swimming requirements document, but each club then was required to develop their own Return to plan that aligned with that, and also worked within their individual facility setting. So
just before I go to Jeff and the facility side, when you talked about, Alberta for sure was one of the first ones to be able to return to, how was the sentiment kind of to you in Alberta from across the country? And then also, were the clubs always willing? I mean, it's probably relevant to any sport. Were they always willing to say, yes, let's work hard with these facilities? Or was it sort of a frustration, we've been there long enough? Because everybody's getting tired, and that was back in June.
Yeah, no, I think there was a real willingness to work with their facilities, and I'm interested to hear from Jeff's perspective. But I think some clubs did a really good job of returning to, and were really quite organized in their approach, and probably because of the sort of the guidance documents that we put in place for them as well too. But I think there was sort of an eagerness to go back and a real eagerness to follow requirements. And so we, set up a few town hall sessions where we walked through what it would look like for clubs so that they could answer questions, and made sure they each had an identified person within their club that was responsible for developing their plan. So in some cases it could be their head coach, in some places it could be a volunteer member that took that responsibility on. Mm-hmm. What was interesting though is because we were allowed to open kind of towards the end of our season, because year-round runs from September till August. Our summer clubs, we really pretty much canceled them, knowing what was happening from their season perspective. But when we were allowed to open, the other benefit is that we actually had a slow start. So we had 7 summer clubs and 13 year-round clubs and 2 master's programs that returned. And so they were actually able through that July and August to kind of experience. We learned from them, they learned from us, so that in September, when we fully launched the season, there was some learnings that were already in place. Like, I think we're on version 8 of our return to document. Right? So yeah.
Hopefully you probably will get to double digits, hopefully not triple digits.
I think so, yeah.
So Jeff, talking about that, and then, Cheryl said, hearing from you from a facility side, again, how do you plan? Because now you have, 20 different areas you want to satisfy. And so how did you deal?
Thanks. I have to admit, at first it was overwhelming. When we looked at the size of the facility, over 300,000 square feet, and the multitude of different programs and services we run, it seemed like an overwhelming task. And our success, I think, came through a couple of different ways. One was we quickly identified that we were experts with facility operations, but not with pandemics. So we positioned a certain number of points that became the framework for how we decided to reopen. One of which was we were going to take guidance from the experts on health and safety. So for us, it was about boiling down the multitude of different restrictions, measures, and understanding how to synthesize those into a number of manageable pieces that we could implement in the facility. And then we broke the facility down, and we really treated every single different space as an individual fitness area. So the pools were treated different from the gyms, and the gyms were different from the locker rooms. And when we compartmentalized each of those areas and we assigned experts internally to those areas and then leveraged information that was coming from the health officer, it made it more manageable. I said earlier, we reached out to a network. We were so fortunate to work with some great organizations, and together we tackled this as an industry. So one of the things I said to you when we were planning this is, maybe a question around silver linings. And for me, that is certainly one of them, is the way in which the recreation and sport community has worked together to ensure safety, to uphold the highest standards, to lead, not follow, is pretty impressive. And I think something that will carry away with us and will make us better post-COVID. I have to say, particularly with sport, while it also seemed quite daunting, it turned out to be, I won't say easy, but one of the easier things to bring back. And in large part, echoing what Cheryl said, it was about understanding that we as a facility had a plan, which was then going to be built into a plan that a PSO would have, an NSO would have. And what we created was, I think, a series of redundancies. And it created a professionalism and a detail to what return to sport looked like. And then when you consider sport in general, there's a predictability to it when it comes to training. So we could anticipate who was coming, when they were coming, what they were doing, what they would touch, and when they would leave. And for us, that became much more manageable than the member side of our business, which is treated equally, but less certainty. We don't know who's coming, when they're coming, how many people are coming, what they'll do. So on the sports side, we felt there was a huge opportunity. And in many ways, it was a blessing for us, a facility that runs on a dual mandate, to be able to instantly turn on sport. Public took time, and there was a slow crawl, and then it picked up with speed, but sport came back right away. There was a hunger and a desire. And when we readied ourselves and when we partnered with other organizations, it became doable. And it was like the light switch went on. We went from no sport to all aquatic sport almost overnight.
So Nick, I'm going to ask you, there's that, Jeff mentioned, the hunger side from the sport, and that's sort of ingrained in every person who wants to compete. In your sport, and I will say Soccer Canada, when we had posted, Sport Calgary had posted all the return to and Soccer Canada's guidelines of the most basic things about, don't share water bottles, which is something with my daughter's ringette team we're always talking about, but you basic things. And when we're talking about sport changing, I think there were good things that are going to come out of this, and sport will change. But for you, Nick, when you guys started then hearing that your season would happen, and the season becomes the Island Games, the bubble that would happen at Charlottetown, when did it start? August 13th. What was your reaction, sort of as an individual with that fire to compete, as a team, knowing that you could actually, something would happen, and yet you're doing this bubble, which we'd started to see in various sports, and we saw in the NHL, and it seemed like it would potentially work. How did you react?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was mixed emotions. I was extremely happy that we could at least get some sort of season underway, even if it was a condensed 10 game season, especially seeing what happened to the CFL side of it, which is also a Canadian domestic league. And you know, I think we were very comparable to the travel and the teams we have in our league. But to see them not take off and to see us go through with our bubble, you know, as an athlete, you're extremely thankful that, you know, you have organizations, especially, I don't think people remember or know that we're only 2 years in the making, this league. And, you know, CFL's been around a lot longer than we have, and a lot more stability than we do. And for us to be able to go through with it, and for them to have so many obstacles and to say that they couldn't go through with it, I think a lot of our athletes were just grateful for that. On the flip side of it, you know, we got notified fairly late that we were going to go to the Island Games. It was the unknown. It was a lot of it was up in the air if we were going to do it in Victoria, if it was going to be in PEI. They were trying to look at both locations that had the lowest amount of cases, and that would be the safest to bring in 350, you know, staff players included, and who would actually allow us to come into their province with such low cases and you know, be there for a month. And like I said, we were very fortunate that Charlottetown allowed us to do that. Obviously, there was under strict agreements that we had to abide by while we were there. But yeah, it was a very weird and short turnaround. I remember, you know, almost daily trying to give my wife updates. Yeah, are we going? I don't know. What's happening? Is there? I don't know. And then we started talking about the protocols with the league, about the health protocols, about going through with it. And I remember it was almost like the 10-day countdown. We got notified, and it was like, all right, we're leaving in 10 days to start this tournament. And a lot of the guys were like, we haven't even played a game yet. Like, we haven't had a proper preseason. We had just gone through the steps of, you know, 4 players at a time, 10 players at a time, no contact. And for us, it was frustrating because we couldn't follow Alberta health rules as far as groups training. We had to follow rules throughout the nationwide. So all the leagues or all the teams were equal. So we could only get back playing full when Toronto was allowed to get back playing full. So everybody had to be equal across the board. And so, you know, we had a couple inter-squad games before we left to PEI, but that was our preparation. And it was one of those, you say goodbye to the wife, you say goodbye to the 2 kids, and when are you going to be back? It's like, it depends how good we do in the tournament, right? And that's what the week leading up was. It was a very uneasy, unknown, but at the same time, you're excited because you're going to get a season in. So a lot of mixed emotions when it was announced.
I didn't realize that it's interesting how they did it, and I kind of agree, but that it became equal across the country. Just quickly on the bubble. So the environment when you're there, again, pretty incredible that, you know, community, again, that had low numbers, allow that many people in. Did you feel safe in that bubble? Did it work?
Yeah, it worked, and it was right from the get-go. So what they did is they had 2 charter flights. One left from Victoria, so picked up the team in Victoria, stopped in Calgary. We got on the flight, went up to Edmonton, picked up that team, went to Winnipeg, picked them up, and then that was the 4 teams that went out to PEI. And the other charter flight went Ottawa, Toronto, and then out to PEI. So you felt safe. Everybody had the mask on. Everybody were in their little cohorts that we'd been training with previously. And everybody had been given an email and direction, and we had to sign off on, you know, you got to follow all the agreements and all the, stay in the hotel. So what happened when we arrived in PEI, everybody got off the flight, got in their own team bus, and everybody was assigned their team bus for the whole trip. So nobody else would use it. Everybody got their team bus. You didn't have to worry about disinfecting it or if anybody else was going to use it. And we pulled up to the hotel, and there were big gates around the hotel. So nobody could get in, nobody could get out. And there were security guards at every exit when we got there. And that was our somewhat jail bubble hotel.
So 2 more questions I want to ask the panel before we turn to some of the questions that some of the guests have asked. Let's talk about, Nick, I'll start with you. We're all talking sort of our work hats on. But within all of this, we also have our real lives. And so, Nick, you talked about, your wife and your 2 young kids, and Jeff and Cheryl. I'll start with Nick and then go to Jeff and Cheryl. But if you guys can talk on that mental health side, because we're trying to manage, Nick, you're trying to manage a team, you're trying to compete. Jeff, you're trying to manage an entire facility. Cheryl, you're trying to manage a province. And yet, how do you continue to monitor yourself? I think that's one of the tough things that people are finding, especially, we're literally 1 month right now from Christmas. And so there's a lot of unknowns. So how did you manage, and how are you managing, or any tips for people?
Yeah, it's tough. Especially when I thought my wife and I had things under control about how we were going to deal with it. And we had a good routine about when I went to work, then my wife went to work, I have 2 children, they're 4 and 2. So, obviously they're in the plans and the routines. And then to all of a sudden say, okay, well, I'm going to be gone for 4 to 6 weeks. Good luck with the family. Definitely threw a wrench in all of our plans. So we had to make sure that, our parents came up to help. We had support there. Those outlets were there so my wife could still work while I went away. And while I was away, it was that, feeling of I'm away from my kids. I haven't been away from them longer than maybe 2 days since they've been alive. And now all of a sudden it's 5 weeks. So there was a lot of FaceTime, a lot of checking in. And I think the biggest thing was just checking in on all the players as well. How are you doing? You missing home? Yeah. Let's talk. Let's go have a coffee. Let's go to the corner of the hotel. Let's go out on the balcony. Let's, just check in mentally and away from everything else, away from the soccer and the sport side of it. If you're not playing, you're playing, who cares? But let's just check in mentally. And we were fortunate enough to have a sports psychologist do a Zoom session with us while we were there and actually talk about this quarantine fatigue that just wears on people, and how to kind of stay optimistic and be just grateful about other things that you're learning, and what have you learned from the experiences. And for us it was always about what can we control. Let's worry about what we control. We're not gonna worry about other stuff. We can't go out and see the city, we can't enjoy PEI, but we're here. We can control our atmosphere here, our team spirit, our outcomes in the game, and let's worry about that. And that's what we did. We just tried to stay optimistic and be creative about everything. We had movie nights, we had game nights, we had the nice days. We ordered in like cornhole off of Amazon, and we got it. We set it up outside on the balcony when it was a nice day out. Just to bring in some fresh air and some light into the atmosphere. You need to be creative, and you saw some teams that weren't, and you could tell that they were hurting. Like, you just felt bad for some of the teams because they didn't have that necessary leadership or somebody who was going to step up and say, okay, tonight everybody, we're doing movie nights. Let's get some popcorn. Let's watch a funny movie on the big screen, type of thing, and then you start piling up if a team loses. And I think that was the big thing being in this bubble, because all 8 teams were there and you walked by everybody. So you can imagine if a team's lost 3 or 4 games and they have to walk through the corridor and these other teams are laughing, enjoying life. They've won 3 games. They're in first place right now, and this other team's lost 3. And knowing that you still have to stay there for 4 weeks, you can't leave the hotel. You know, it wore teams down. And I think the reason why we did so well, and the teams that actually won did so well, is because they had this team chemistry that nothing was going to break it. And I think that's where, you know, even people in different businesses or different jobs, those are the people that excel because they see the light of, you know, okay, I'm at home, so I can work on this maybe a little bit more. I have some more time for me. I can do this hobby. They're very creative with it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the people that struggle are, oh, it's dark, it's winter, I'm going to stay at home, I'm not going to do anything, what's going to happen? So I think it's the mental health side of it, I think is huge for not only athletes, for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I like the word creative. Jeff, I'm going to turn that question over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I'm glad you've woven it into the presentation. Look, I might be one of those people that is accused of burying his feelings, and it's probably true. And I would say this is another silver lining that's come through in sort of a weird, warped way that's come through the COVID pandemic. I'd say as a person and as a leader, I'm much more in tune with feelings than I am thought, or more in tune I've ever been. Maybe not balanced, but I probably shouldn't disclose this to some people who are strangers, but recently we did an EQI assessment, and while scored fairly well, it suggested I think more than I feel. And I was challenged to feel more. And it wasn't until this COVID pandemic that I've really allowed myself to do so. And so, like Nick's comments, it's really about being open to that thought. I think ensuring that you as an individual provide yourself with outlets that allow you to break from COVID-19, whatever that is, whatever your pursuit and passion is outside of work and outside of COVID, find the time, make the time. And we say that in fitness all the time. People say, I have to find time to work out. And I always say, make the time to work out. Don't find the time. And I think it's true. Find the time to pursue and make the time to pursue passions. And I would say as a leader, I draw on that much more. I check in with the team in a way that I never would have prior to the pandemic. I ask people how they're feeling. I check in, I look for signs. And so that's one thing that I'm grateful for as a result of COVID-19. I think it's made me a better person and a better leader as it relates to taking care of myself and helping to take care of other people.
Awesome. Cheryl?
I don't know if I can top that. Because it's really interesting, because I would say as a provincial sport organization, we are, I think one of our focus areas right now is on the mental health of our athletes and our coaches, and even our club boards and administrators, right? Because I think this has had a, you know, as we all know, a real impact. And, you know, we've created some tools and resources along that line. Back in June, we did a webinar series and engaged with the CSI Calgary to look at sort of the effects of the pandemic and, you know, how you build resilience as individuals and leaders. So it was targeted really towards our coaches and to our club boards, right? And that whole health and well-being piece. And I think it's going to remain, you know, critical as we move through this. And I would say as leaders, we can exemplify that. And I think sometimes it's, you know, it's easy to get pulled into the everyday. And I think we do have to carve out that time for ourselves to replenish and to rejuvenate, whether it's meditation practice, whether it's walks. Like since the 12th of November, I can't tell you how many walks I've gone on. It's just to get out, to think, to clear my head, right? Even 15, 20 minutes just to break from, you know, sort of the routine of where we're here. But I think it is an important piece, Katrina. And I think too, and not to sort of dwell on kind of from Nick, but we're entering the long days, right, of winter.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're in that period where, you know, the darkness prevail over the light. So I think it's vitally important as leaders that we role model what we would like to see within our various areas. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for that. And I think Jeff, the words "make the time," even though I made the time a few days ago to actually go skate in an outdoor pond, and the irony is I fell and I now have a cracked kneecap, so I won't be walking or skating or doing anything for the next bit. So bad timing for my part, but you know what? Things can always be worse. before we get to a few of the questions that have been asked, we are going to return to sport again. So Cheryl, I'll start with you. What will you do differently or better? Or, we're learning. Every day we're learning. So how about from a PSO, from Swim Alberta perspective?
What will we do different going forward? That's really kind of tough to answer. Yeah, Katrina, honestly, because I think the other piece that we've learned through all this is there's a lot of, and it kind of goes back, I think, a little bit to the mental health piece we just talked about and the resilience is, and we're in it right now. So these announcements come, it throws us into chaos a little bit because we're all trying to figure out what it means, right? And get the answers so we can go out to our various members or stakeholders that we're working with, right? So we know that that's part of it. So I think one of the things I've learned over the last few weeks is that's gonna occur. And I think we're gonna see a few more stops throughout the next few months. And I think we need to be able to sort of prep and prepare individuals and our clubs and groups that we may start and we may have to pull back and stop, and we may start and we may have to pull back and stop as we go through this. I think going forward as a return to, I think we've learned a lot about how sport can be done differently. And I think we've taken some time to reimagine that. So we, swimming as an example, typically has 40 officials on the pool deck. Well, we can't have 40 officials and 300 kids as we go forward. And that's going to change for a long time to come, right? And so, it's challenged us to do better in those areas or differently in those areas while still maintaining the integrity of the sport. So I think it's learning from those lessons. I think it's continuing to follow the health orders that we have put in place and communicating out to our members and working in partnership with, in our case, facilities to deliver the sport. But I think the learnings really are in how we can reimagine sport too as we go forward beyond the pandemic as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Jeff?
Yeah, for maybe a couple of things, but to be brief, I'd say one is, that it's almost cliche to say we're in this together because you hear it so much, but it really is true. The way in which the industry has worked together to find opportunities has bettered the industry. So I would think that would be one thing I would want to hold on to and hope that it's shared by the likes of Nick and Cheryl and the organizations we work with, that we're going to come out of this and realize that while we might not always agree, we are all in this for the same reason, and that's sport and benefits that come from this. So I would hope that while those disagreements may still exist, that we come out of this with a passion to work together and find solutions together. And I don't mean that to be cliche, but I think that's a real opportunity that's born out of this that we should leverage and continue to hold on to.
Nick, I'm turning it over to you now.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've learned is to be creative and find the positive out of all this negative. And I think for me, moving forward and being a leader, and maybe at one point in my career moving into a managerial position, I want to make sure I have open lines of communication with everyone, and I want to make sure that the other players on my team know that that I'm there for support. That it doesn't have to be about soccer, it doesn't have to be about sport or anything like that, that we can talk about if they have something on their chest. And maybe that's going to make them, feel more comfortable in this country. We deal with a lot of foreigners that come in here. And I think the competitive side of me wants to win. I just want to go out, train, do well, win, but maybe there's not much appreciation and looking at where did these guys come from, what's going to make them feel at home, what's going to make them excel here in Canada to get the best out of them, that then at the end of the day will then help my performance because they're on my team. And so maybe looking at that going forward and just seeing what guys need. And I think WhatsApp groups, Zoom calls, all these things I think shouldn't be just stopped as soon as this pandemic's over. I think a Zoom call is a great way to check in on people that maybe can't make it to a meeting, they can't make it to a certain spot at a certain time, or they're maybe not even in the same city as you are, but you can still have that face-to-face call and feel like you're still emotionally, physically there. And I think moving forward, that's going to be a lot of things that are going to be used in sports teams. And I think the mental health side of it is now just going to be evolved just that much more.
I think, you've all touched on how sport and how we've all changed and adapted. And it kind of goes to one of the questions, and just that, the traditional historical way of doing things is a little different, whether it's as an athlete, whether it's as, a PSO, whether it's within a facility. And the good things that are coming out of it, we're learning to adapt, we're learning to do things differently, we're learning to communicate, we're learning to take time, and we're acknowledging that. And perhaps our communication is better, between sports, between facilities. A question I want to ask, and kind of incorporates a few of the questions, but everything is that, is sport different now, and will it be different? And I mean sport from every level, from this high performance level to the absolute grassroots. Has this pandemic changed sport? Again, from the athlete, from leader, coaches, everything. Nick, I'm going to start with you. I know it's a really broad question, but
yeah, it is a broad question. But I think people involved in sport have now realized how important sport is, and how much it ties different people together in different communities. I mean, I look at, the thousands of fans that, on weekends enjoy that social aspect of coming to the stadium and cheering a team on and getting behind players. The younger kids that come to the stadium to look up to the players and want to be a part of that. I think sport is something huge across the world, and it ties so many different communities together. And I think, if anything, people will now realize, if they haven't realized before, how important being involved in sports is at any level. I help coach some younger kids, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and they're sad that they can't go out with their friends and play. And that's a huge part of growing up. I remember that was one of the main reasons I joined soccer, is because all my friends played soccer. That was when I enjoyed life, going out playing soccer on the weekends and being with my friends and having a laugh. And that passion from soccer came because I had fun. And I kept on having fun and enjoying it and having these memories. And that's what built the passion. So if anything, it'll just remind us how important any involvement in sport is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's so important. We have to continue to spread that message. Jeff, from your perspective.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely echo what Nick has said. I can see it here, that when there's a shutdown or a disruption, the disappointment that's felt is significant, and there's a ripple effect that goes beyond the athletes. It's the ancillary get-togethers before and after, and all of those different things that are part and parcel of sport. And then conversely, when we turn it back on, the pace at which people return is unreal. And then coupled in between that, or sandwiched in between that, is when there is a restriction, the way in which athletes and clubs and teams are trying to do whatever they can to have some semblance of their sport is impressive. I say that only in a good way. And so, no, I would absolutely echo what Nick said. I think, if anything, the passion and enthusiasm and appreciation for sport is going to be even more so than it was prior to the pandemic.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Cheryl?
Yeah, well, and I would say what we've seen too is and it goes back to Nick's point earlier about creativity. We've seen some really creative things happen that I think will stay. And I think one of the gifts the pandemic has given us is a way to look at how we can do things differently. So from a swimming perspective, for example, we actually launched a Racing Unplugged series. So, I mean, normally our racing is tied to officials and time clocks and touchpads. And, we created a passport series where our athletes could just race using their coach's stopwatch, which was foreign to our coaches too. What do you mean? I can just take a time and submit it to you, Swim Alberta? And we had over 1,600 athletes do over 6,000 swims in the fall in that format alone. And, you know, that's something we would have never envisioned doing previously, right, outside of a competition. Or we're seeing clubs really become creative and reaching out and how they do things different virtually. And I don't mean necessarily coming together on a Zoom call like this, but, you know, with the recent International Swimming League that just happened, we've seen clubs build upon that and reach out to clubs in other parts of the country to create these mixed teams where they're racing each other within their home club, but sharing the results. And, you know, they may have members from their home club with members from the club they partnered with in Quebec, right? And so I think these things will last because it's creating a different connection for our athletes that they haven't had through our sports before. And it's different, but it is one of the silver linings. And I think the gifts that has come out of this is a way for us to look at how we can do things in a different way as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, you know, we always say good comes out of bad. And so we're learning a lot and we are going to come out of it. So we don't want to keep anybody past the lunch hour. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you to Nick, to Jeff, to Cheryl. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, your learnings, your experiences. Thank you to all the attendees. If there's anything you want to chat about, if you have suggestions, please visit us at Sport Calgary and .ca, again, virtually, as we all are right now, and let us know. But thanks everybody for being a part of this. We will be returning to sport again soon. We're going to be returned stronger, and we will continue to spread the word of how important sport is at all levels, physically, mentally, socially. So thanks you guys for being a part of this, and stay safe, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.